G'day everyone, Dan Dugan here from Edge Small Business Consulting, and today I've got Tim Henry here from Henry Lawyers. How you going, Tim?
Okay, Dan, thanks for having me.
Not a problem, mate. So, like we've done in the past, I've just got three quick questions around estate planning, if that's okay, Tim.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So, the first question, Tim, is what is estate planning and why is it important for a small business owner?
So, estate planning is essentially preparing for death or incapacitation. So, being unable to act for yourself. So, in that, we basically set up a will, an enduring power of attorney. Those are the two basic structures we do. And then once you have died or lose capacity, you're passing on control. So, control of your assets, control custody of your children, for instance, so that you don't leave a mess after those events happen to you. In terms of business estate planning, it gets a little bit different, a little bit more difficult, I guess you'd say, because you have a separate entity to think about. So, depending on how you own your business, some people own sole trader, some people are a trust, some people run it through a company. And those entities need to be dealt with separately. And just having a will for your personal assets doesn't always cover those entities. So, it is important to let your lawyer know when you're doing your estate plan that you do have these other entities so they can be accounted for.
Fantastic. So, um, let's say you do have an estate plan in place. How often should you look to, I guess, review it? How often, and also what sort of business things need to happen in business to trigger you to review that estate plan?
Yeah, right. So generally, I say every 3 to 5 years, you should be looking at what you have in place, making sure it's still accurate, still reflects what you want to happen. Make sure you haven't given something to someone you no longer see anymore. Make sure your executor isn't someone who's now too old to do the job, for instance. In terms of with a business, the major things to think about is whether or not you change the structure. So if you go from sole trader to an incorporation, then you're going to have shares and director roles that haven't been considered in your previous estate plan. So they need to be considered. You do not want to leave a mess for your loved ones after you've passed away with how to deal with your company. Because if you think of it this way, if you've given everything to two children, but then you've started a company and then you have shares in that company, shares with yourself, shares maybe with some other partner, your shares in that company are more likely going to pass through that will. But if they all go to multiple different people, you might cause a mess that's not going to be practical after you pass away. So changing the structure of the company, of the business, is going to be the most important time to review your estate plan. Also, other things are if the people named in your estate plan, such as your executor, have either passed away or are no longer the right person for the job.
Fantastic. And just really quickly on that one, I guess it probably affects business continuity as well when you're, I guess, trying to continue the business. If a director's passed, with the other directors trying to keep everything flowing, trying to get access to the money, I guess it's really important to have a plan in place there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, shareholders' agreements, company constitutions normally cover what happens if there is a loss of a director and who can take control of that director role. If you don't have an estate plan in place, it makes that a lot harder to pass on that role or to have the shares allocated to new members to then vote a new director into that role. So, it's very important to make sure your estate plan is up to date and covers those scenarios of directors, shareholders, trustees, appointers, anything where there's an entity in place that isn't a personal asset needs to be dealt with separately and updated separately as you update your business.
Fantastic. So probably the last one, you've sort of touched on this a little bit. If say a small business owner doesn't have anything in place, what actually happens? How does it all work from there? And do you have an example potentially of something that's actually happened?
Yeah, so the biggest problem you have if you don't have a will, first off, you don't have an executive. So you have no one that has immediate control over your assets and immediate ability to take control over the company or the business. So no executor means that a loved one needs to go to court to be appointed as administrator. It's a bit of a process, not going to happen quickly. So essentially, the continuity of the business is going to be stalled greatly at that point. The other problem with not having anything in place for an estate plan is how your estate is distributed has to be in accordance with the rules of intestacy, which is our government saying this is what should happen depending on what sort of relations you have. If you have a spouse, for instance, and two kids, then your estate needs to be split between your spouse and your two kids. It doesn't just all pass to your spouse. So if you have shares in a company, for instance, those shares, when you pass away, would need to be split between your spouse and your children. So you can see how that's going to cause issues from a practical point of view, especially if the kids are underage, if they're under 18, or if the kids are over 18 and aren't necessarily going to be making the same decisions that your spouse would. So basically, you just want to have an estate plan to make sure you know who you're passing control to, as well as you know who you're giving assets to, and that you're making sure that if you do have entities, you are giving assets in a way that will pass control so that it can continue the business on. Most of the time, though, you find that businesses don't continue on when the main person dies, that they just get wound up pretty quickly, especially small businesses that are based on sort of professional services being one person.
Mm. No, absolutely. And that is because that main person's usually the lifeblood of that small business. So, you know, having a continuity plan, especially around the estate planning side, is super important because you just don't know what's around the corner. So thank you so much for
Yeah,
your time, Tim. Really appreciate it. And I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you very much.
no worries. Thanks for having me, Dan.